You are listening to the Booktrospective Podcast, a podcast for all types of books. And even though we read all types of books across all different types of genres, we want to give a disclaimer. Many of our books and a lot of our content sometimes is intended for mature audiences. And we don't believe in censorship, but we do want our listeners to have the opportunity to decide if our episode or podcast is good for them. So, with that, let's get into the episode. Hey, it's Dominique.
And Keely.
And you are listening to Booktrospective. And this week we are covering A Court of Sugar and Spice by Rebecca F. Kenney, which is a Nutcracker spicy retelling.
Yes, very much so. Very much.
And I want to ask Keely how our week is. And also, we recorded out of order. So next week when you listen to our episode, we will tell you about our Thanksgiving and stuff, which is already late anyway. So whatever. But yeah, we really don't have much to say. This book, before we talk about anything, normally when we talk about spicy books, I edit it down or water it down as much as possible. But honestly, I really can't because it's not even the spicy scenes. It's even when it's not a spicy scene, they're talking about sex in this book. So we'll get to triggers and stuff, but just know that this is a very this is a raunchy episode. So it just is what it is. So there's that. But, yeah, so we'll just jump right in. Keely, do you have the blurb?
I do. With their inheritance restricted until their marriage, sisters Clara and Louisa, both in their 20s. They're both in their 20s.
They are very much adult.
Must live with their godfather, Drosselmeyer. One night, an accident brings to life one of the strange wooden dolls in Drosselmeyer's mansion. The Nutcracker doll is a cursed fey prince, and as he pleads for the sisters' help, during the ensuing journey into the fey realm, Clara encounters the handsome Sugarplum Faerie, and he promises her a chance to enact all the forbidden fantasies she has dreamed of. Meanwhile, Louisa and the Nutcracker Prince battle and bicker over everything, despite the growing attraction between them. And to make matters worse, the entire Seelie kingdom is under threat of conquest by the Rat King, ruler of the Dread Court. This is a spicy adult fantasy retelling of the Nutcracker fairy tale.
Yes, very, very spicy.
Very spicy.
If you have a word to describe this.
I would say dark.
It is dark. I would say, I've already said this was raunchy, but I really am going to say it's raunchy. It is. So I started reading it and I was having trouble getting into it, which is why I read the next book first. And then I'm just reading along, not to a spicy scene yet. I'm just reading. And then I'm like, what did you say? Because she just says things. And I'm like, oh, it's so out of the blue, the sexual context. And I'm just like, wait a minute. Whoa, okay. So, yeah. All right. So this is a Nutcracker retelling, which one of our past episodes recently, I had to ask, what was the Nutcracker even about? Because I feel like the Nutcracker is a thing that we all know what the Nutcracker is, but we don't really know what it's about unless you've participated in it. So it's a prince and the Rat King, and then when you started saying all that, it made sense. So yeah. So anyway, so there is
a lot of triggers, and I'm trying to find them.
Yeah. So
trying to find somewhere that has the
I'm
triggers
sure there's a list. Yeah. So Keely's working on the triggers. So yeah, so it's a Nutcracker retelling. There's two girls. They are two adult women. They're not girls. They are women. It's old timey, so they can't get their inheritance till they're in their 30s or till they're married, and then they go into a fairy world. There's a Rat King who's taking over. If you don't know what the Nutcracker is, there's the Rat King's trying to take over for the prince because the prince is gone because this fairy hunter has turned him into a Nutcracker. X, Y, and Z.
So yeah, the triggers are family death, violence, gore, monsters, blood, sexual threats, light bondage. Was it light?
I guess because it was requested. I don't know.
Light CNC. Was that light? And that CNC is consensual non-consent.
Yeah.
Primal play, public sex, giant rats. I mean, that's not included, but I feel like that's a trigger.
Ugh.
Giant rats.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, like, attempted sexual assault.
Yeah.
Like, it never actually happens, but it's almost there. Like, it was wanted. It was, yeah.
Very large orgy.
Yeah.
Enslavement.
Yeah.
And there's probably more.
There's probably other ones, but... Okay. Well, you have not read this book, and you don't want to be spoiled. Buckle up. All right, so we're going to get started. So we start, this is a dual POV. We go back and forth between Clara and Louisa. Clara is who we start with, and her and Louisa are arriving at Drosselmeyer's house. They are both over 18, but they need guardians because they can't access their father's inheritance until they're 30. So they've been appointed to live with Drosselmeyer, who is a man they've never met, but he's like referred to as their uncle, but he's not really their uncle. He's like a godfather. And Louisa says, like, I'm just going to get married as soon as I can because I'll get my money faster. And, like, I don't care who I marry. Louisa's very, like, free-spirited. And Clara's very, like, plump and, like, reserved and proper. So they walk up to the house, and Louisa is, like, talking about their situation. And Clara says, like, you know, you can't talk like that because she's, like, kind of being raunchy. And she's like, he's an upstanding man, because Louisa's like, I wonder if I can, like, seduce Drosselmeyer, basically. And Louisa says, oh, like, you're right. Father wouldn't dare have a friend that was a rake, which I love. I love the, like, term of rake as, like, being, like a slutty man. But she's like, too bad I can't seduce him. And the door's open, and they didn't realize it because Drosselmeyer goes, seduce me. And he's just, like, standing right there. And Clara goes, oh, don't pay her any attention. Like, she's mad. Like, she's crazy. And he says, I like to pay attention when women talk, especially the mad ones. And Louisa says, I like you. And Clara apologizes for them having to be there, and they've never met before, but he says that their father wrote many letters to him about them, and Louisa says, probably mostly about me, because Clara never does anything interesting. And they go inside, and he has, like, this makeshift elevator, because he is an inventor. And he asks, like, or they ask, can they see his workshop? And he says no, but they can see his, like, what do you call it? His showroom. His exhibition room. So he is, like, talking to Clara, and he kind of connects with her because Clara is a painter. And he talks about, like, their dad sucked. Like, he basically, like, never found any benefit in, like, Clara being a painter. And, like, if it basically, like, wasn't, like, purposeful or, like, had, like made any money or did anything like that, it didn't really have, like, a purpose to their dad. But he tells the girls they can go anywhere in the house except the women. I don't even want to refer to them as girls because, like, these are adults. They can go anywhere in the house except for the 3rd floor because that is, like, his space, and he asks that they please respect it. And Louisa says, why did he have to be so respectful about it? Because now I'm going to feel guilty if I go up there. So they both have, like, their own room, but they're, like, sharing a bathroom. And so, like, while Louisa's getting changed, Clara takes a moment to, like, explore by herself. So she goes downstairs and she finds, like, a billiard room, and she's like, there's, like, this weird looking painting that reveals, like, a hidden door, and she goes inside, and there's, like, a weird cat, like a claw, this large, like, dragonfly wings. There's an eyeball that she pretty sure is, like, moving around. And the statues that are there, like, look like they're human, but they have pointy ears. And she hears, like, a thump, and she runs back outside, and there's, like, this wooden maid. And she screams, and Drosselmeyer comes, and he's like, you've never seen an automator before? And he's like, you know, it's basically, he described them as, like, the little, like, the girl that is inside, like, a music box, like, you spin, like, you turn the key and they spin or whatever. He's like, it's the same concept, but they are the maids. And he tells her to go get her sister, and, like, she kind of feels, like, dismissed by him. So we go to Louisa, and she is like, okay, I want to see this room because Clara tells her about it. So they go down for dinner, and there's 2 of those automators in there, like, serving dinner or whatever. And Drosselmeyer uses them because obviously they're cheaper and less annoying than having, like, real human staff. And Louisa's talking about getting married again, and Drosselmeyer says, like, well, don't forget, as your guardian, I would have to approve anyone that you want to marry. And Louisa's just so tired of being, like, treated like some rebel that needs to be tamed. And she still thinks, like, maybe she can seduce Drosselmeyer or anyone else. And even the girls that, because she's been with girls as well as guys, like, she's not a virgin. She has been with men and women. And she knows she has to be strategic about seducing him because She wants to find out what he's hiding on the 3rd floor. So he takes them to the showroom after dinner, and Clara says, like, it's so beautiful, and he seems pretty pleased. And he shows them that there's, like, this enormous dollhouse with all of these, like, dolls, essentially, in there. And I can't remember if we're in Clara or Louisa, because I kind of lost track for a moment. One of them is like, this is extremely weird for this grown man to have this dollhouse, but whatever. But the dolls also look really strange. Like, they have, like, some of them have really sharp teeth or, like, pointing ears. And he pulls out his newest doll, which is a Nutcracker. And Clara or Louisa runs to the kitchen to get some nuts so they can actually, like, use it for a Nutcracker. And she gets startled because there's, like, autonomers in there. And they look like they were talking, but now, like, they look like they look like the Toy Story toys. Like, they got caught in the act and they just stopped. And she tells him when she comes back, she's like, your dolls are creepy, but whatever. So she's like cracking a nut, and she drops the Nutcracker, and he hits the floor, and she's like, he looks so weirdly human lying there. And Drosselmeyer says, like, oh, it's fine, like, no harm done. But she notices, like, a splinter of him broke off, and she hates that she did this. It's her first night there, and she's like, I'm so accident prone. But she plans on coming back down tonight and fixing it, because she also planned on sneaking out anyways and roaming the house. So that night, like, she gets in bed real quick, and she's like, oh, I'm tired. Good night. So, like, Clara will go to bed, and, like, she can sneak out. So she sneaks out. It's, like, pitch black, and she's, like, going down the stairs, and she, like, notices that there's, like, chains on the door and, like, iron locks on the windows. I'm like, I'm not staying here. What is going on? So she's, like, in the dark. So she's, like, using her hand. Oh. She's using her hand to, like, guide herself down the stairs until she realizes I'm not touching wall anymore. And she turns, and there's a freaking automator, like, staring at her. Like, this place would give me the creeps. I'm not leaving my room ever. So she sneaks into the showroom, and she tries to, like, hurry, like, fixing it. And she ends up, like, slicing her finger with the splinter. So, like, she's gluing it back on, but she's getting, like, blood all over it. And I'm like, girl, like, this is not sneaky at all.
No.
But she holds, like, the splinter in place to, like, get it to glue. And he starts vibrating, the Nutcracker. And she's like, immediately starts thinking, like, naughty thoughts. And she thinks about how she used to, like, sleep with Clara's math tutor, and, like, she used to have sex with him. So she picks up the Nutcracker again, and he starts vibrating, and then he's growing. And she goes, something is wrong with you. You can go back to guarding the dollhouse. And she puts him down, but he explodes to be like 5 or 6 times bigger than he was. And now he's life-size, and he's, like, less wooden, and the, like, lever on his back is gone. And he's alive. And he, like, unhinges his jaw, and he says, mortal girl, assist me. And she says, excuse you, it's woman. And he says, help me up. And she's like, why? And he's basically like, I'm a prince of fairy. And she says, I'm a queen of this land. And he says, really? I thought you were just a guest of that horrible hunter who brought me in here. And she's like, feels him, and he feels like living wood. And she wants to go get Clara. So she tells him to, like, shut up. And she hides him, like, in the little room that Clara found. And he says, I don't think I like you very much. So we go to Clara, and Louisa's, like, waking her up. And she assumes that Louisa's gone up to the 3rd floor, but she takes her down to that hidden room, and she sees the Nutcracker, who tells her he is not a Nutcracker. He is a prince of fairy that was captured. So Clara's like, I'm asleep. I'm about to go. But Louisa pinches her, and she's like, you're not dreaming. He's real. And he tells them that Drosselmeyer is not just a human. He is a fairy hunter, and he has been doing it since he was very young, and he's very smart. He's a sorcerer who can cast terrible curses, and that most of his puppets are captured fairies. So he tells Louisa, like, your blood interfered with the spell temporarily and brought me to life. But he says it won't last long. I have to go home and immerse myself in the unending pool. And Clara asks, like, well, what about all the other ones? Do you not care about your people? And he says, of course I do. But if I don't return quickly, the court of dread will take over my court. And Louisa says, well, I can put more blood on them. And he says, it would take most of your blood because my curse is new, but the other ones have been here a long time, and it would take a lot of blood. So they ask him, like, well, why haven't you stopped Drosselmeyer? And he says that Drosselmeyer has a portal that opens in different places of fairy, so he never can, like, predict where he's going to be. And the Nutcracker says, like, please help me get home, save my people. But Louisa says, like, well, what if you're evil and Drosselmeyer is the good guy? And Clara starts thinking of, like, all the stories, like, you know, the stories always say that fairies are evil, and, like, they like dwell in debauchery, and they eat people and all that kind of stuff. And they're like, well, have you done any of that? And Clara says, like, how would we even help you? And he says, there's a portal in this house, and he can feel himself starting to, like, harden again. And Louisa just starts laughing because he's like, I can feel myself starting to get hard again. And Louisa's like, dirty mind. And so he looks at her and gets the joke. And Clara's like, ignore her. She's tired. But Clara agrees, like, we'll find the portal. And he says, find a door to nowhere, as he starts to turn back into the Nutcracker. And Clara says that they'll look for it tomorrow during the party on the 3rd floor because Dresselmeyer's having like a party and like he's going to have his showroom open or whatever. So as they get ready for the party the next day, Clara sees like how beautiful Louisa looks and like how she thinks Louisa is like, more beautiful than her. And since they're not like girls anymore, they're supposed to wear their hair like pinned up, but they decide to leave some of their curls down. And during dinner, like all she can think about is like how normal like Dresselmeyer looks, but like she can't put off like what happened last night. Like it really happened. So something must be true. So he takes the party after dinner to the showroom or the gallery or whatever for an auction. And so Louisa like sneaks over and grabs the Nutcracker and like heads upstairs. And as she's trying to get it, oh my God, one guy grabs the Nutcracker and basically says, do you think that Dresselmeyer could turn them into a doll that basically gives blowjobs? Sure. I mean, those exist. Whatever. And so to distract the old man, Louisa is like showing off her cleavage or whatever. And he tells like one of like the autonomers to like go find some more drinks or whatever because he wants to like basically get Louisa drunk. And Clara's like, don't use your sex or whatever to get what you want. And Louisa's like, why? Like they're gonna look at me like this no matter what I do, so I might as well use it to like for my advantage. And Clara's like, well, the world needs to change. And Louisa's like, I'm not going to hold my breath on the world changing. Like, I'm not going to wait for that. So Louisa sneaks the doll out and Clara goes to leave, but she looks and she sees Dresselmeyer looking at her. And they like have a moment and he knows that she knows about him. So we switch over to Louisa and Clara's like, he knows about us. And she's like, we have to hurry. Like, he's not going to leave his guests, but he will be coming soon. So they go to the 3rd floor and it's locked. And there's like no keyhole in this door. So Clara pulls off her bandage and puts the blood on the Nutcracker. And she's like, I'm going to put more just to like make sure he stays full longer. And he comes out, like he looks all angry. And she says, so happy to see you again. And he tells her like the lock is like spelled with iron and it can only be opened with human blood. But it might only open to Dresselmeyer's blood. And Louisa says, well, I hope not. And she uses her finger and says like, why is everything like involved with blood? Like what's up with blood? And he says like blood is like, the key to life and it contains salt and iron and it can serve as a catalyst. And she says, so the more blood I put on you, like, will work basically. And he says, well, yes, but I won't have my powers and it won't be permanent until I get in that pool. And he says like the pool is like the original source of Fae magic. So it does work. The door unlocks and they tell him about like the weird conversation, like eye-to-eye conversation that Clara and Dresselmeyer had. And he says, your name is Clara. And he like looks at her really weird, which does that ever come up again? I don't think it does. Is it like something with the real Nutcracker?
I don't know.
I don't know. Because I feel like that never came up again, but okay. So he like turned and he's like, okay, like, thank you. But it seems like so painful. And Louisa snaps at him as like, oh, it was so hard to thank us, wasn't it? You must have never had to thank anyone before, like your highness and all this stuff or whatever. And she calls him an ungrateful prince. And so they go in like this hallway and there's just like a bunch more iron doors. So she unlocks a few of the doors with her finger and like she goes inside one and it looks like a workroom. But there's like benches and tables that look like they could like tie people down. And then she goes into another room and there's a door that looks like it's made out of branches that burst out of the floor out of nowhere. So Clara calls her after she's finding that because Clara found a room full of weapons. And the Nutcracker says, these are the weapons of my people. And he says his friend Andel is one of the automators downstairs. So he knows most of the people that are here. And he can't remember how he was caught, but he says he just woke up in this room and was turned into the Nutcracker. And so he's like, now that I'm not in Faerie, like my people are left vulnerable to the invasion of the Rat King, who is the king of the Court of Dread, which is like the Unsullied. They have like 100 names. I don't know. So Louisa is like still wondering. She's like, I don't know. Like I still don't know if the Fae are like the fairies are innocent or like are they really bad? I don't really know. But she can tell like Claire's pretty much all the way on the Nutcracker side. And so Louisa goes like, well, can you lie? And he's like, what's the point of that question? Like, if I say no, I could just be lying. Like, that's a stupid question. And so she picks up a weapon because the Nutcracker also had picked up a weapon. And Clara says, like, I can feel that he's not a bad person. And Louisa says, well, I'm not so sure. And I was like, oh, you're pissing me off. I was like, you're already pissing me off. And so Louisa says, like, why would our father trust us to a person that's so wicked if the fairies are perfectly harmless? And the Nutcracker says, well, I never said that we were perfectly harmless. And she says, well, you treat you treat us bad and you talk about us terribly, but you want us to help you. And she says, well, what would happen if I cut you with this? And she says, I'll let you go into Faerie, but you're going to take us with you so we can see if what you say is true. And Clara actually seems like excited to go, because like it seems like something interesting, which is very rare because like the only other time that Claire's ever done anything with Louisa was like when she lost her virginity to like these like male boys that they like pulled into like their shed at like their homes. And the Nutcracker's like, absolutely not. Like there could be a war. Like I don't know what's going on at home. And Clara says like, wouldn't someone like just take your spot while you were gone? And he says, no, because I'm not dead. So there's no succession. It's not like in your human world. And he says, I was stuck in that Nutcracker form, so I couldn't yield my power to anyone. And Louisa says, so then the Rat King can't really take over your kingdom if you didn't give him your power. And he says, well, no, he can't take my powers, but he can influence my kingdom and he could take it over. And he's like, I don't want girls in voluminous skirts running around. And Louisa says, well, what are you going to do when my blood runs out and you slow down on your own? And he's like, she's basically like, admit it, you need us. And he's like, fine, you can accompany me until I secure another aid and then you must return. So her and like Clara grab some weapons and supplies and they head towards the little like portal. And Clara starts to worry because she's like, well, the portal won't be in the same place like when we need to get back. But Louisa's like, look, just go. Like, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. And the Nutcracker is worried because he thought like maybe he could pick where they land, but he obviously doesn't have enough time to figure that out. So they try to figure it out, but they hear someone coming. So Louisa just shoves them in the portal. So we go to Clara and it is so beautiful and bright that it's like making them go crazy in Faerie. And he's like, oh my God, I should have warned you. He's like, close your eyes, basically. He's like, the sight of Faerie can make the human mind collapse. And he tells them to close their eyes and it starts to get better. But Louisa's like, I'm not going to close my eyes. And then she finally closes her eyes and he calls her a good girl, of course. And he takes their hands and he tells them like, it won't be long before Dresselmeyer comes after us. But they actually can already hear him like calling the girls' names. And he's like, don't listen to him. He's not what he seems. And Clara opens her eyes and she can see Dresselmeyer like aiming a crossbow at them. And Dresselmeyer says, stop, you idiot girls, you ruin everything. And they hear him starting to cast a spell. And the Nutcracker says, shut your eyes. But then these 8 hideous rat figure soldier thingies show up. And she turns to Dresselmeyer and she's like, help us. But he just turns around and leaves. He's like, forget it, I'm out of here. So the prince says, like, I'll protect you. But Louisa's like, what? You can barely hold a sword. Like, you're wooden. So she pulls out, like, these balls that she took from the house. And she, like, blows up some of the rats. But she realizes that's because they were made of iron. And so they'll hurt the Fae. So so the rats are actually just wearing, like, rat heads. But they're, like, human Fae things underneath. I don't know. So we go over to Louisa. And they all kind of get thrown back by the bomb that she throws. And so then, like, she sees, like, the prince taking out, like, one of the rats, and Clara's fighting off another one, and, like, she starts fighting one, and it basically is, like, he's basically like, well, I'll have sex with you before I kill you, and she's like, no, I've had sex with a lot of people, and I draw the line at you. Rat's not my thing. But the rat is actually able to like get her down, and he like starts like pulling off her clothes, and she feels so helpless, and he punches her. But then Clara comes up and like murders this thing, and Louisa's actually surprised because like Clara doesn't act like that. And then the Nutcracker's able to like kill the final rat, so they're able to like get them all killed off. And he tells them like they're lucky that these rats basically have like aura magic and not focus magic, because aura magic is more dangerous, something like that. So he apologizes to Louisa for being attacked, and Clara says, like, Dresselmeyer just left us to die, and now we can't even go back. He'll kill us for helping the Nutcracker. And Louisa says, I think the Rat King has taken over your realm. And the Nutcracker agrees, and he says, we need help, and there may be someone nearby. And she's like, a friend? And he's like, no, family. So we go to Clara, and she cannot believe that she just killed this thing. She never expected to ever kill a thing. And so they're like traveling through, I don't know if you would call it a wood, but whatever. And she's like, the sun like looks like their sun. But the Nutcracker says like basically they're like two sides of the same coin, like his world and their world. And he starts to stiffen up again, and Louisa slices her arm, but she asks him, and she asked him before, like, what would happen if you drank my blood? Would it last longer? And he tells her, only the Seelie do that, which is like the rats and the stuff like that. But she says, like, well, obviously, like, you really need to. Like, if it's going to be better, just do it. So he does, and it seems like an intimate moment. So Clara's like, I'm just going to go get me something to drink from the river. And so she goes down to the river, and it tastes, like, super sweet. And so she, like, sees this, like, tree across the river, and it's, like, a willow tree. And then there's, like, another rat. And she's like, oh, my God. So it comes to attack, and it, like, sniffs her face, and it's about to do something to her, but it gets shot in the eye with a candy cane. But it's like a candy cane arrow. And then she stabs in the stomach because she has knives. But then this, like, male fae comes up, and he's, like, laughing, and he's got pink hair and, like, all these, like, really sharp teeth, and he has, like, dangly, like, candy cane earrings. And he picks her up, and he just flies away, and he says, I'm saving you. And she's like, no, stop, put me back. And then he just, like, drops her down in this, like, bluish grass. So everything here is, like, candy. Like, it's just, like, Candyland. And so she's, like, really self-conscious because she is, like, wearing nothing. Like, her clothes got all ripped. She, like, is never, like, this exposed. And he also has, like, a little snowflake necklace, and he has, like, a cape. And she says, take me back to my friends. And he says, you must have a death wish. And he says, I see why the rat went after you. You smell scrumptious. And he asks, like, why, or who are your friends? And he says, I hope not Dresselmeyer, because I'll have to kill you. And she says, he's my godfather. And she tells him, like, you know, why she's there and about her sister, the Nutcracker. And she says, we're looking for the prince's cousin, a great warrior. And he says, I know of no warriors nearby. What's his name? And she doesn't know. And he says, of course. You don't know because fairies only give their names to people they trust. And he says, well, maybe I shouldn't trust you. And she says, well, then I shouldn't trust you. And he says, but really, I'm so pretty and I saved your life. And he is pretty, except for his teeth, which are all, like, really pointed and sharp. Yeah, that's a scary part. And she asks, like, okay, are you going to take me back to my friends? And he says, that depends. What will you give me? And she says, I have nothing to offer you. And he says, in fairy, you do. You have bones, tears, fears, ears. He's like, you don't know how many people love human ears. And he admits, like, I do have some Unseelie friends. And she's like, oh, great. Like, you're in allegiance with the Rat King. And she's like, I got to get out of here. And he says, no, I am not with the Rat King. And he's like, for one, he has no sense of style. And he tells her, you're so cute when you're shocked. And he says, I haven't played with humans in a while. You're a virgin, aren't you? And she says, no. And he says, a pity. The blood of a virgin human girl could have paid for your passage back home. And she can't stop thinking about painting him. And so that is what she offers him. And he agrees, but he says he doesn't want a regular portrait. He wants her to paint something of his choosing, and he wants her to come to his home to do it. And she holds out her hand and to agree, and he says, in fairy, we do this differently. And she says, well, one of them, he or she says, well, a kiss works. So she gives him, like, a quick kiss. And she kisses his cheek. And she tells him her name, but he doesn't give his name, and says, we'll go find your friends now. So we go back to Louisa, and he's drinking her blood, and the Nutcracker gets, like, taller, and now he has, like, lashes, and his, like, clothes aren't painted on anymore, and he has, like, black hair, and he says, hopefully I don't have to do that again. And she asks, like, did I taste bad? And then she goes, like, where is Clara? And he grabs her all of a sudden, and he puts his hand over her mouth, and he's like, please be quiet for once. And she notices that the grass is moving, and a mole rat comes out, and it's huge. And she is so stupid. She starts giggling, laughing, because she says, it looks like a dick. He tells her, don't move. It detects vibration. But now she can only think about Clara, and she's, like, panicking, and she won't be still. And she wants to fight it, and he says, you cannot, and I don't have my powers. All she can think, like, as he's holding her is, like, he is, like, the most beautiful man that she's ever seen. And she's about to make a noise, so he just puts his lips over her to quiet her. And they start making out. And she's like, I would literally let him have sex with me right now if he wanted to. But then Clara shows up with this pink-haired fairy. And the mole rat, like, grabs the fairy. So they, like, start attacking it. And they stab the mole rat. And this, like, white goo comes out of it, and she says, I knew it. It's an oversized dick. And I'm like, Louisa, please. Please, please. So the Nutcracker says, you're disgusting. And she says, you didn't think that a moment ago. And he says, I was just trying to distract you. And we learn that this pink fairy is actually the cousin that they were looking for. And the fairy goes to the Nutcracker, well, like, why do you want me? Because I was banished from the court by your father because I was hanging around the Seelie. And the pink fairy goes, should I be punished for my lovers? And the Nutcracker says, like, look, I didn't agree with it, but, like, it was out of my hands. And the pink fairy says, well, you did not come to my defense now, and now you want my help. And the Nutcracker says, this is not for me, it's for the kingdom. And he says, I need your escort to the pool. And the pink hair fairy says, well, I'll help you, but you need to come home with me because it gets very cold at night and dangerous. And he says, in the morning, Clara can fulfill my bargain. And then, like, the Nutcracker looks shocked, and he's like, you made a bargain with him? But the pink hair fairy's like, it's fine. Like, she's just going to paint. Like, it's nothing salacious. Like, it's fine. So we go to Clara, and she asks Louisa, like, did something happen between you two? Because now she seems to, like, hate the Nutcracker. And Louisa just says, like, nothing. And then Clara's stomach growls, and, like, everyone's like, you good? So the pink hair fairy, like, picks 2 fruits from, like, this tree. And I was like, oh, sugar plums. I was like, I know these are sugar plums. And that's what they are. He tells them, like, these were my favorite when I was a kid. He says so much so that they started calling me sugar plum when I got older, but it took on a different meaning. And Clara remembers, like, you're not supposed to eat the food that the Fae give you. And she asks, like, what will it do to me? And he says, nothing. It'll just make you feel full and warm. And then he gives her another one, and this time the flavor is different. And he tells her that the flavor is different every time you eat them. And he says, people call me sugar plum because I'm delicious, and I taste different every time also. And she says, your personality? And he says, no, my cum. This man tastes different every time he ejaculates. Like, what? He's literally a sugar plum. And he tells her, like, well, if you decide to stay in fairy, you know, humans do age slower. And so they get back to his house, and they're told that this house used to belong to a fairy who craved the blood of other fairies. And the Sugarplum Fairy tells Clara, like, you know, you shouldn't feel shame about your needs, because he can kind of tell she's got, like, some sexual desires that she represses. And he tells her, like, you know, I can tell someone made you feel this way. And she admits it was her father. And he says, that's interesting because your sister is the complete opposite. And Clara says that she's the experienced one. And the Sugarplum Fairy says, but you're the secret one. And Clara thinks about how her sister would go and bring people to the house and sneak around. But Clara would just go into the closet and, like, pleasure herself because she was always afraid of, like, her dad walking in on her. So they go in the house, and there's literally, like, candy everywhere. And the Nutcracker warns them, like, this is not a regular candy shop, and that the Sugarplum Fairy is a little bit like the original owner of this house, except for that he deals in spells, and some of them are very illegal. And so one of the spells, like, he has, like, is a mimicry spell. So if you, like, chew this candy while you look into someone's eyes, it'll turn you into them. Kind of like a polyjuice potion from Harry Potter. So Louisa, like, wants to know, like, do you have one for enhanced pleasure? And the Sugarplum Fairy says, like, well, I do, but, like, it's not meant for humans, so I don't know what effect it'll have on you. And then he, like, kisses her hand, and Clara is, like, jealous because she's like, of course Louisa has, like, both of them, like, falling all over her. So Clara asked the Nutcracker, like, what happened between, or no, yeah, Clara asked the Nutcracker what happened between him and her sister while she was gone, because Louisa goes with the Sugarplum Fairy to get food, and the Nutcracker just kind of says, like, you know, it was just a simple, like, kiss, nothing, like, major. And, like, they bring back food, and the Nutcracker does not eat anything. And so Clara falls asleep for a little while, and she wakes up to the Sugarplum Fairy, like, pulling her hair back, and he's just telling her how beautiful she looks. And he tells her, like, you know, you need to take a bath, like, you're covered in blood and dirt. And he says, like, Louisa already took one. And she just thinks, like, he looks even more beautiful now. So she looks down, and, like, one of her breasts is completely out. But, like, he's not even, like, he's not touching her inappropriate, like, nothing like that. So we switch over to Louisa, and she's, like, on her way back from the bath, and she passes Clara in the hallway. And she's like, the water is magical, and, like, all my bruises and my cuts are gone now. And she, like, opens the door to a room thinking it's hers, but actually the Nutcracker's in there. And so she gets pissed off all over again. And he's like, you know, why don't you just let it go? And so she snaps at him, and she's like, why do you act like I'm so promiscuous? And he, like, admits, like, oh, I've only ever been with 2 women. And she's like, you're a prince. Like, why wouldn't you use that to your advantage? And he's like, well, I have to be selective. And he says, I want to be a good ruler, not a careless rake. And he says, do you want to be a hole for every man that makes you wet? And she says, you can't admit to what you enjoy. And he says, yes, I can. And she says, so prove it to me and admit that you enjoy kissing me. And he's like, no, you're imagining things. And she says, no one feels nothing when they're with me. And he says, you have a very inflated opinion of yourself. So she just like drops her towel and he says, you're very beautiful. I never said you weren't. And she says, so why are you acting like this? And then realizes, she's like, do you not have your like body parts? And he says, I do, but its current level of function is not of your concern. And he's like, what can't you grasp about the fact that I've been tortured and constantly changing and I'm not interested in coddling you tonight? And so, like, the Sugarplum Faerie, like, pops his head and he's like, oh, never mind. And he, like, just leaves. And the Nutcracker says, like, why don't you just go back with the Sugarplum Faerie tonight? He's like, I know you already, like, hooked up with him earlier when you guys went to go get food because it took you a long time. And she just leaves. And she does wonder, she's like, am I being selfish? Like, he was actually just tortured and, like, abused. And, like, he is correct about that. And I also do agree with that. So we go back to Clara and she's, like, in the bath. And she's like getting ready to get in the tub, but she's undressing and like the Sugarplum Faerie busts in and she's like, excuse you, I'm naked. And he's like, well, I brought like a healing spell. I have to put it in the water. And he says like, you know, maybe I shouldn't let you bathe alone. And she says, why are your nails so sharp? And he changes them. And he's like, well, they're like normal nails now. And she says, I think you should go. And so she starts bathing and she starts shaving. And then like these like little like weasel things are running around and she cuts herself, which fair, because I would too. And so he like runs back in and he's like, oh, those are just like my pet weasels. Gross. And he tells her, you know, I'll make them leave or whatever. And he tells her like, you know, because she stands up and he's like, why don't you sit in the water? Like it'll heal your cut. And she's like, duh, like why didn't I do that? So he asks her, like, you know, why are you using a razor? And she's like, well, I was shaving. And he's like, oh, like most fae don't have body hair. That razor was from my last guest. And I was like, that is disgusting. Also, why are you just using some random razor?
Right.
You don't even know whose razor that is. And then now it's like the last person's, and you cut yourself. Now you have hepatitis. Gross. I don't know. Human problems. I don't know. Anyways. So, he's like, you know, let me check you out or whatever. So he comes over and even though he like doesn't need to, he starts like touching like on her breast and like, also he has wings. I don't know if I mentioned that. And he says like, well, you're all healed up or whatever. And he tells her where her room is and he goes to leave and she's like, please stay. Like I might have another accident. And she like gets out and he like starts touching on her and she says, I thought you wanted Louisa. And he says, you're more interesting. And he pleasures her and he tells her he has a rule and he says, if I see someone naked twice, I have to tell you my name. And his name is Phineas. And all I kept thinking about was Phineas and Ferb, which is not appropriate, but and so after the whole bath scene, she goes to her room, but Louisa is like in there passed out, like laying across the whole bed. So she goes to like the Sugarplum Faerie's room and his bed is big enough for like 4 people because he basically like, he's like, yeah, like I sleep with a lot of people all the time, but now like, he's like, I'm really into like just having one person that I can like pleasure and that will give me pleasure. And he assures her, he's like, I will not be going after your sister. Like, I'm not interested in her. He's like, also, she seems to be interested in my cousin and is not having any success. So we go to Louisa and she wakes up and realizes that Clara is not in the room with her. But obviously that's because she's taking up the whole bed. And she finds her in bed with the pink-haired fairy. And they're like all snuggled up. So she immediately is like defensive and she like taps him on the shoulder and is like, hey, to the hallway, please. And he like pulls a blade on her. Right? This is my house. And she's like, what did you do to my sister? And he's like, none of your business. And she's like, well, this isn't like her. And he's like, I didn't force her. We didn't even have sex. And he assures her, like, I won't do anything to Clara that Clara doesn't want done to her. And she doesn't want to leave Clara alone this morning, but Clara's going to stay back and paint. And like the 3 of them are going to go have a meeting to like basically like rally the troops. So Phineas like conjures up an outfit because he can conjure clothing. They don't last forever, but he can conjure clothes. So he gives Louisa an outfit. And then the Nutcracker kind of like shoots down like what she's wearing. And she says like, well, if you want any more of my blood, because she's like, do I look nice? And he's like, eh. And she's like, well, if you want my blood, you'll tell me I look nice. And he's like, you look nice. So they leave the house and now it's like fully winter. And she's like, do you guys not have fall? And they're like, no, we have summer and winter and that's it. So it's cold outside, but the Sugarplum Faerie is able to like spell the clothes so that they're warm. I go back and forth between calling him Phineas and the Sugarplum until like they all find out what his name is. And she asks like, is the Nutcracker as strong as you? And he's like, are you serious? He's the crown prince. Of course he's stronger than me. And then he accidentally drops the Nutcracker's name, which is Lear. And he goes, crap, like, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to do that. And then he says it again. And then he's like, fine. My name is Phineas, and his name is Lear. And we learn that the Nutcracker / Prince / Lear, his father died recently. And so technically, he's the king. But because he became the Nutcracker and he hasn't had his, like, coronation or whatever, he has not, like, officially taken his title as king. And he will not, like, accept being called king. So the prince is kind of like, he still like is like good on blood or whatever, but he is walking like a little stiffly. And Phineas says like, you know, if you were anyone else, I would ask you to punish me, talking about Lear, and because he told his name. But he's like, but I actually like punishment, and you're my cousin, so like that would be awkward. So Phineas like complains about like how slow they're moving since like they don't have phase speed, and Louisa says, you know, like, I want to apologize for last night to Lear. And he says, is that all? Because she's like, I want to apologize. And then he's like sitting there and he's like waiting. And he's like, is that all? And she's like, yes. And he's like, you guys really don't know how to apologize, do you? And Louisa says, like, you don't know anything about humans except for what you probably read. And he admits, I don't know very many. And then he calls her a hypocrite. And then they have like this little back and forth. And he says, you thought I couldn't lie. Like, of course I can lie. And then Phineas comes back because he like had ran ahead, and he comes back and he has like these cinnamon buns, and he's like, what is going on? And she takes one of the buns and she says, I hope saying thank you is enough. And she turns to him and is like, who saved you from the iron? And then Lear like snaps at her and he says, thank you, your royal something, for always saving me. And he's like, as if I didn't save you from the rats or whatever. And he's like, just think, if I wouldn't have saved you, I wouldn't have to listen to you right now. So like, they're just like going back and forth. So Louisa says, oh, so that's how a thank you is done or whatever, like trying to be smart. And like Lear kind of smirks at her and smiles a little bit. And she just thinks how beautiful he is. And Phineas says like, we're almost to the tavern, which is where they're meeting. And he tells them like he had sent off messages last night to some different fairies, but he's going to cloak Lear so like that they don't know that he's like there right away. And he warns like them, like, these people aren't necessarily friends. They're just people who might be allies or whatever. And he like spells her ears so like she looks like a fae. So basically like it's probably going to take them like 2 weeks to get to this pool. And then they're going to go through all these like dangerous places. And Louisa really doesn't want to go, but like, I mean, she doesn't really have any choice. Plus he needs her blood. So when they meet with like the group or whatever, like some of them like seem like real, like, they're like really like questioning things and like don't seem like super happy about it. Oh, actually, let me back up a minute. So before they even get to the tavern, when he's spelling like her ears or whatever, he also like they also let her know that like, of course this is a fairy world. They can smell everything. And so she's kind of asking like, well, what do I smell like? Food? And they're like, well, like food and like sex. And like, so they start talking about sex, and like Lear just like walks off, and Phineas is like, yeah, he never really liked talking about sex. And Louise is like, that's so weird. Like, don't the Fae have sex all the time and like have orgies and all kind of stuff? And Phineas is like, yeah, but like, that's kind of boring to us now. And so they go into the tavern, and Phineas like throws up this sugar dust, which like exposes everyone's faces so they can like see who's in there. And he like passes out like these little treats to everyone. And they all like start arguing about like why they were brought there and like what's going on with the Rat King and like where's the prince. And Phineas tells them like the prince is not gone, he was just indisposed, and like about needing to get him to the pool and like restoring his powers. And then he tells them like basically Dresselmeyer caught the prince and turned him into the Nutcracker and all that stuff or whatever. And then Lear exposes himself, and because they're like talking about calling him king, and he's like, you can call me prince until I take my crown, but I do need your help. So they all basically like agree that they're going to help him or whatever. But like during the conversation, Lear grabs Louisa's leg, and she notices like he's turning back into wood. So like they go off into like a room. And he doesn't want to drink her blood again, but she tells him, like, you don't have a choice. And it seems like it's happening, like, faster, like him turning back. So she makes a cut, and he says he needs more. So she just, like, pulls her shoulder, and she just tells him to bite her. Which I was like, girl, like, does he have vampire teeth? Like, what do you mean bite me? So he, like, smells her and, like, gasps at her scent. And she can feel, like, so he does have his parts, because he has an erection, and she can feel it. And she, like, grabs him and starts to, like, pull down his pants. And she, like, she starts dirty talking him, and he calls her basically like a filthy slut and tells her to stop. And he says, I don't have sex with dirty mouth human sluts. And I was like, God damn. Like, I was like, God. Lear, I was like, you don't have, like, he gives me Rowan vibes. Like, he is, like, punch her in the face, why don't you? And he says, I only have sex with people I care about, and you will never be one of them. And he just leaves her on the ground. Oof. You just drank my blood, bro. Like, oh my gosh. So we go back to Clara, and she's been painting all day, and she's almost done, and she can hear, like, the group coming back. And so Phineas, like, tries to come in the room, and she, like, holds the door closed, and he's like, this is my house. And then he, like, spells the door away, and he's like, have you eaten or drinking anything today? And Louisa's like, no, she never does when she paints. And he agrees to, like, not look at her painting as long as she'll drink water. So she, like, wants to go back to painting in her quiet place, but she can tell something's wrong with Louisa, so she tells, like, Louisa can stay or whatever. And she's like, did things not go well? And she's like, it's fine or whatever. She said they did, like, run into some rats on the way back, but they took care of them. And she does mention that they know Lear's name now. And Clara can tell that, like, when she says Lear's name, like, whatever's wrong has something to do with him. So Louisa admits she did try to seduce him again, and he's not interested in her. And she's like, why is he not interested in me? And Clara says, maybe it's because of the curse. And Louisa says his body wants me, but, like, mentally he hates me, and he called me a slut. And Clara's like, what? So she's like, I'm about to go talk to him. But Louisa's like, no, don't. Like, men have called me that before, but, like, it didn't hurt before, but this time it actually hurt. And Louisa says, I just wish he would just let go for once. And Clara says, I've never heard you talk like this before. And she says, I've never had to fight like this before. And Louisa tells Clara that she doesn't have to worry about Phineas because he likes her, but she tells her to be careful with him. And so Louisa says that she does like Phineas and that they did talk about, like, the orgies, and he's had a lot of sex. And Clara is, like, jealous, like, hearing all this stuff about it. And Louisa leaves, and she says, I'll try to stay on my side of the bed tonight in case you don't want to share Phineas' bed again, calling it his bed of debauchery. And Clara, like, loves her sister, but she knows, like, whenever Louisa has, like, a bad day, she does whatever she can to, like, spoil everyone else's joy around her. So, like, that last little bit that she threw in about Phineas was, like, really to make Clara doubt him, which is exactly what she's doing right now. So she paints, and then later Phineas comes in the door, and he's shirtless, and he says, it's been hours, you have to eat. And she says, I might have been wrong about what she painted, and she's nervous. But he comes over, and he looks at it, and he is, like, shocked because she painted herself from the night before, because when he, like, was pleasuring her, she was looking in a mirror, and so she painted herself in the mirror. And she's, like, thinking he doesn't like it, but he comes over, and he kisses her, and he tells her he adores it, and he tells her this has meaning to him. And he tells her how he wants her, and she asks, why me? And he says he understands if she doesn't want him because he's well used. And Phineas goes to leave, and, like, the old Clara, like, would have let him go. She would have been, like, too afraid. But she's not the old Clara, and she says that's not what I meant. And he says, you know, doing the same thing over and over again can be fun, but it does get old. And he basically says, like, you know, at the orgies, they used to abuse him basically because he always tastes different. So they basically used to make him come over and over again, and it was like a party trick or a joke. And Phineas says, like, you know, he really became jaded at one point, and, like, he almost couldn't even, like, orgasm anymore until he, like, changed to his, like, sexual habits. And he says, you have charmed and intrigued me since I met you. It's your scent, your skills, and something else I don't know. And they start kissing, and he says, like, no, you have not eaten or drinking anything today. Like, have you even been to the bathroom? And she tries to push him a little bit, and she's like, well, what if I don't go? I'm not a pet. And he said, well, then I'll take the door off, and I'll watch you until you go to the bathroom. And she's like, okay, no. Okay. So she goes to the bathroom, and, like, then she comes back, and, like, he makes her, like, sit on his lap, and, like, she eats a little bit, but then they do end up, like, having sex. Like, he vanishes his pants, and, like, they have sex. And when he comes, she, like, tastes it, and he tastes like vanilla with cinnamon and brandy. Which, I will say that about this book, I feel like we don't get enough of the flavors. I was like, we only got that one. I was like, what happened to all the other flavors? So they have sex, and then they hear, like, this big crash. So we go back to Louisa, and this is prior to Clara, Phineas and Clara having sex. So Louisa is, like, in, like, another room while Clara's still painting, and Phineas is, like, pacing because Clara's not eating, she's not drinking, and Louisa's also, like, pacing because she's just, like, pissed off about Lear, and Lear's annoyed. So Lear's like, play some music, and Phineas, like, gives them all this candy that, like, plays music and makes them dance. And, like, even Lear seems, like, relaxed. And then, like, both of the men leave. And, like, Clara is, like, or Louisa is, like, super turned on. So she's like, okay, nobody's here. So, like, I'm just gonna, like, masturbate. She's, like, pleasuring herself. And she's, like, got her eyes closed. She opens her eyes. And Lear is just standing there watching her. And so she's like, okay, like, game on, whatever. So she just keeps going. And she thinks, like, you know what? He's just as slutty as I am. And he looks at her and he just goes, I hate you. And she shrugs, and then, like, she's done, so she's, like, goes to her room, and she wishes, like, he would, like, reach for her, but, like, she's still, like, just, like, she's happy because she knows, like, he can't stand her, but he obviously, like, wants her. So she goes to sleep, but then she wakes up, and she hears this big bang, and she's like, great, like, it must be Clara having sex with Phineas. But it actually sounds like the house is getting, like, ripped in half, and it is, by these giant rat soldiers. So Phineas and Clara is, she, like, runs out, and the, like, part that was ripped is, like, going into the rat's mouth, and it's where Phineas's bedroom is, and she's, like, screaming, trying to attack because she's like, he just ate my sister. But Lear grabs her, and then all of a sudden Phineas and Clara come running out naked because they were in, like, wherever she was painting at. They weren't in the bedroom. So Phineas tells Lear to, like, take the girls and he'll meet them later, and Clara's like, you know, no, he's gonna get hurt, but they go. And he just starts, like, every time he fights, like, he's, like, laughing, having, like, a good old time. Like, Phineas, like, starts attacking the rats. And Lear says, like, Finn is incredibly powerful. Like, he just hides it. And Louisa says, someone betrayed you. And Lear asks, like, who do you think it is? And she, like, says she thinks it's Theanne, which is one of the people they met with at the tavern. And it's because she was, like, basically, like, she was asking so many questions when they, like, met. And Lear says that's unfortunate because she was an old friend of Finn's. And Louisa says, well, I'm not always right. I did like Dresselmeyer at first, and I was wrong about you. So Clara and Louisa, like, kind of make faces and, like, joke about Lear and how, like, he thinks about them. And he's like, you know, this is not the right time. Like, we're running for our lives. You can make jokes later. So they literally run for, like, hours. And finally, Phineas catches up to them, and he says it was Theanne. So Louisa was right. And luckily, she had only told the local commander, who didn't get a chance to tell, like, the Rat King. So, as of right now, they don't know that Lear is even back. Phineas says, like, he brought what he could, but most of his spells were ruined. And most of the stuff that Louisa brought is gone as well. So they don't really have a lot of weapons. So we go to Clara, and they are exhausted because, like, it's been 2 days of them, like, running. Phineas doesn't want to, like, really use his magic because they're trying to preserve it. So, like, the guys are just, like, telling them, like, different stories. They tell them, like, basically Lear's mom died when he was really young from, like, a disease, and Phineas's parents died fighting. And they end up getting horses, which is better, but, like, they have to fight off, like, a bunch of monsters because of the girl's scents. And at this point, it's been, like, a whole week, and Clara's upset because she hasn't had any more time with Phineas. So whenever Lear needs blood, him and Louisa, like, sneak off. And Clara knows, like, people assume that they're having sex. But Clara knows that they're not. And Louisa, like, is covered in bandages because she just keeps letting him bite her now. And Phineas, like, it's, like, freezing where they are. But Phineas, like, never gets cold because, like, his magic. So finally, she's, like, had enough. So she tells him that she wants to paint him. And he tells her, like, I did protect the part of the house where, like, the painting was. And he tells her how he needs her, and she tells him about this fantasy she has of running from him. And he tells her that he can make that happen, and they make a plan for that night. So we go back to Louisa, and Lear has been drinking from her, like, longer and longer. And he drinks from her every other day. And she knows he's starting to become addicted, and she's afraid that he might actually kill her. And he hates it because he knows that he's changing too. But she says, like, you know, we just have one more week of this. And she loves, like, these sessions with him because it's the only time that they get along. And he asks her if she's afraid, and she says, I'm afraid of how you make me feel. And he says the feeling is mutual, and she's shocked. And she doesn't want to push him, so she says, I often wonder what Dresselmeyer meant when he says that you're not what you seem. And Lear says, like, I am basically what I seem. And he says, I'll have unimaginable power when I take my position. And he says, you'll go back to him when this is done. And she's kind of shocked because she's like, what do you mean? And she says... She was like, I mean, I guess I'll go back and I'll have to get married and I'll find a way to give Clara money because, you know, she wants to be an artist. And Lear asked her, like, well, what do you plan on doing? And she says, I guess I'll just cheat on my husband every day because sex is an escape for me. And she asked him about STDs and he's like, what? And so she has to explain to Lear what venereal diseases are because they don't have those in Faerie. And she asked him, like, could they stay in Faerie? And he says, like, he won't allow it. It's too dangerous. And he says, your sister can at least because she can paint. But he's like, what good are you? Like, all you do is have sex. Ouch. And Louisa says, like, why do you keep reducing me to a whore? And he says, because that's how you present yourself to me. And he says, basically, like, she should work on it or change it. And Louisa says, well, you keep making me hate you. And he says, good, that'll make things easier. So we go back to Clara, and she's about to do this game with Phineas. And so he flies her out to, like, this field. And he tells her to pick a safe word. And she picks Dresselmeyer. And he's like, ugh, okay. Like, oh, dear God. Okay. And so he starts telling her, like, immediately, he's like, I could kill you so easily. Like, you should be afraid of me. Like, they won't even hear you scream. And he's like, I don't even have to listen to your safe word. So she's, like, terrified. And he's like, the Seelie drink blood because it's orgasmic. And he's like, it makes you powerful. And he's like, you should start running now. And he's like, if you can outrun me for an hour, you'll be safe. But if not, then I'm going to take you. And so she's running and she's like, oh my God, like, what, is he joking? Like, or is he really going to kill me? Like, I don't know. And like, he has like yellowish eyes. So she can see like his eyes in the dark and like his sharp teeth. And then he's like chasing after her and he starts like ripping her clothes and like, and she's like terrified, but then she's like, okay, no, like, no, I don't think he's going to kill me. Like, she's trying to convince herself. So then when he actually does catch her, like, she realizes, like, it's just a game and he is not going to kill her. So they do end up, like, having sex. And then, like, they have, like, a second round where he, like, binds her up with these ropes and uses, like, a peppermint stick on her. She's, like, living her, like, wildest dreams out. But he's, like, completely naked and he's always sucking on peppermint sticks. And she's like, where do you keep getting these peppermint sticks from? And he's like, my pocket. It's like an interdimensional pocket. Like, whatever. Let's see. And he just tells her, he's like, you know, I feel like I'm connected to you, but like not just in a sexual way. And I was like, aw, fated mates. But he's like, I don't think I'm going to be able to let you go back. Like, I might have to keep you here forever. And so, like, when they go back, she doesn't think anyone noticed, but the next day, she goes to get water with Louisa, and Louisa, like, basically tells her that, like, her and Lear still aren't hooking up, but she knows that Clara and Phineas are. And Louisa says, like, well, where did you guys go? Because it doesn't take hours to have sex. And Clara says, well, it does if you're playing games. And Louisa says, oh my God, like, you have to tell me everything. And Clara's like, no. And Louisa says, well, do you love him? And Clara says, of course not. Like, what a silly idea. And Clara says, or Louisa says, did he ask you to stay? And Clara says, well, I mean, he said he wanted to keep me here. And Louisa says, did he say that after an orgasm? And she's basically like, you know, men just say stuff after they have an orgasm, blah, 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 blah. And she's like, you know, you're so inexperienced with men. And Clara says, you know, Louisa, sometimes I really hate you. And Louisa says, I mean, I didn't mean to hurt you. I'm just telling you the truth. And Clara says, I don't think you believe that, but I think that you just can't bear for anyone to have anything that you don't. And Clara does not speak to Louisa for the next 2 days. And on the third day, Louisa offers to go get water with Clara again, but she just can't give in to, like, she just can't forgive her. Because she's so tired of her poisoning her words with doubt. Because now, obviously, they're at a camp. Like, Clara hasn't had any time with Phineas again, and now she's, like, starting to doubt him. So she's like, no, I'm going to go get water by myself. So she goes to get the water, and something grabs her and is running so fast that she literally passes out. And she's like, okay, this is not Phineas because he does not run this fast. So she wakes up and, like, her mouth is so dry and this, like, weird tiny voice is, like, talking to her. And it's like, I'm sorry, human. I didn't realize you could die from us flying so fast. And, like, puts water in her mouth. And it's, like, this human-shaped flower with limbs. Like, super weird. And Clara is like, why did you take me? My friends will be mad. And the thing says, well, your friends, you were alone. And she's like, no, I was not. My friends were nearby. And the thing says, well, you're mine now. And Clara says, I am not. You cannot take a living thing. Clara says, take me back now, and they may forgive you. And the thing says, I can't. I need a favor from the Rat King, and when I smelled you, I knew he would love you. And the thing, like, wraps her up in these, like, vines, and it starts running again, and this time she doesn't pass out, but she knows that this thing is taking her to the Rat King. So we go to Louisa, and, like, a girl comes into the camp and says that Clara was taken, and they figure out that this thing is called Eraser, and Lear says that, like, none of them can catch it because it runs so fast, and Louisa starts panicking, and Lear's like, I'll get her back when I get my powers, which, like, bro, when is that gonna be? And he tells her, like, you know, because she starts, like, snapping at him. She's like, what do you mean when you get your power back? And he's like, you cannot talk to me like that. I'm the king. Like, you cannot talk to me like that in front of these people. And so Phineas is like, look, I'll go get her. And he leaves his, like, book of spells with Louisa while he's gone. And she thanks Lear for letting Phineas go. And Lear says, I wouldn't have been able to stop him. There's something going on between them. And Louisa says, oh, there is, like they have sex, and I think it's adorable. And Lear says, I've never seen him like this with anyone. He says, Phineas abandoned his duty and his loyalty to the kingdom for your sister. He says, I actually like your sister. And so then all of their, like, allies, the mercenaries, come over and they are pissed because Phineas is, like, the strongest of them. And so they're like, well, now we have nothing. Like, so they all want to leave. So Louisa calls them all cowards and they start calling her a whore. And, like, Lear, like, holds one of them down and they all, like, pull weapons on each other. And Lear just basically tells them, like, you guys can leave, but you're not going to get paid. And so they do leave, but they leave them 2 horses so they could both ride. And so Lear tells Louisa, like, it's going to be harder to pass now that Phineas is gone. So let's stay here tonight. And then tomorrow we can leave and just try to get through with just the 2 of us. So we go back to Clara, and she, like, never really pictured where the Rat King would be, but she did not picture that it was going to be underground. But that's exactly where this thing takes her, and my anxiety would be so high. I'm like, I'm not going underground with you. What? So she asks, like, the racer thing. She's like, what is this place? And it tells her, like, you know...
It honestly makes me think of the prison in...
like in Akatar? Yeah, it's, like, under the mountain. And basically, like, it's where the Rat King is, but, like, there's all, like, there's other, like, outposts and stuff like that or whatever. And basically, like, the racer starts telling her, like, how the Rat King is planning on taking possession of the pool as well, because obviously it's, like, the source of fairy magic and all this stuff or whatever. But most of the Rat King's army actually isn't here because he's planning on taking over, like, so the Nutcracker, well, Lear and his army are called the Seelie, and then the Rat King is called the Unseelie. And so, like, basically all of, like, Lear's army that, like, isn't, like, still free, that they were either, like, captured or they're dead. And so the racer presents Clara as a concubine. Disgusting. And this, like, rat soldier comes up to her and puts his thumb in her mouth. Ew.
Okay.
And then they take her to the Rat King, and I need fan art for this, and I cannot find it. Because he's, like, really big. He has a really big head. He has red eyes. He has a bone crown. He's, like, naked with a human torso. He has, like, half human legs. But then he has, like, rats embedded all over his, like, body in different places. He also has, like, a giant, like, rat penis. I don't know. Oh, my God. It's so disgusting. A concubine, I would just hope that I would just die. Like, I don't know how I could shut my own body down, but I would try. I would just, like, will myself to death. I don't know. Yeah. So anyways, so the racer, like, presents her, and she's like, basically, like, I want to give you her, and I ask that you release 2 of my kind in exchange for her. And he's like, okay, you said that she was a gift. This is not a gift. This is a bribe. And he drags the racer over to him, and he says, well, I can't release yours because I ate them, and now I'm going to eat you. And he eats the flower thing. And he says, take my new concubine to be clothed, and then put her in a cage. And he says, tonight we'll have an orgy. Blech. Oh my God. So Clara's like, so this is it. This is how I die. She's like, because no one knows I'm here and no one's going to be able to save me. And all she can think about is Phineas and Louisa. So we go to Louisa, and she is, like, terrified because it's nighttime, and she only has Lear, who is helpless. And he tells her to check Phineas's bag to see if there's anything that can, like, hide her scent so that they'll be safe tonight. And she does find something that can mask her scent, but he's like, no, we'll need that for the ravine to, like, pass through, like, to get to the unending pool. So she finds, like, this other thing that kind of makes, like a ball of protection, but there's only one, and it's a gumball. So they basically have to, like, hold it between their mouths at the same time and, like, suck on it. So they do, and it works, but it has no warmth on the inside. They didn't think to make a fire first. So now they're, like, inside of this thing and they're freezing. So she asked him, like, can you take your uniform off and, like, we'll just snuggle, like, naked to, like, for body heat? And she's like, I promise I'm not seducing you. Like, please, dear God. So he does, and she asked, like, do you normally, like, stay warm like Phineas and stuff like that, or heal? And, like, he does. And she touches his arm where she dropped him when he was at the Nutcracker, and she realizes there's a gash there from the splinter. And he tells her the reason he hasn't taken off his uniform yet is because he was afraid it would make that permanent. And she says, well, why didn't you say anything? He's like, because you could die from freezing, and I'm not going to let you die. And she says, you don't make any sense. And he says, I do. This is payment. Like, I've been wounding you with biting you. Like, I'm saving your life. And she realizes he also has an erection, and he's like, just ignore it. But she doesn't, and she gets him off. And he hates her for it. And, like, just like the last time, the next morning they get up, they get dressed, and they don't talk about it at all. They're so bizarre. So they start, like, traveling, and as they get closer to the ravine, they, like, notice there's a bunch of, like, rat soldiers, so they start to discuss strategy. And they realize, like, there's no way that they're going to make it through the night. And so Lear's like, I should just turn myself in. Like, this is stupid. I'm worthless. I ruin everything. And he literally starts crying. And Louisa's like, you know, it's going to be fine, whatever. But she looks and she's like, oh my gosh, like there's lifts, there's towers. And she's like, look, and he sees them. So that is going to make it a lot quicker for them to cross this ravine. So she's like, look, you need to drink again before we go. And he tells her to get her knife out in case he doesn't stop. So we go back to Clara, and she is like, it is like Under the Mountain, because she's dressed just like Farrah. She's like barely clothed, and they put makeup on her. And they pierce her ears like 3 times, and there's like a fae that does it, and she like is apologizing, and she gives her this like green pill, and she's like, here, this will like numb you for like whatever happens. Like, oh my god, it is terrifying. And they put her in this cage, and then like there's this like frog that basically tells her like, if you try to get out or try anything, like, you can't get out, it's unbreakable, and if the Rat King dies, the cage will just shrink and crush you to death. Like, okay, so morbid. So they're all brought into like the throne room or whatever, and like all these different like subjects come in to see the king, and then our Sugarplum Faerie comes in, and he's like, you know, I hope for an invitation to the party tonight. And the king says, you're that rogue fairy who goes back and forth between sides. And the Rat King asks Phineas, like, well, do you have a problem with me taking over this kingdom? And Phineas is like, nope. And he asks, like, this spider woman or whatever, he's like, do you think I can trust him or whatever? And she's like, well, I can't really say. He has weak magic, but he does taste different every time. And the Rat King was like, you know, well, you can stay. And, like, Phineas offered to, like, make them, like, some things or whatever. And then the Rat King tells Phineas, like, well, you can have your pick of my concubines tonight. So Phineas looks right at her, and she just knows that she loves him. So we go back to Louisa, and she thinks how, like, teasing Lear isn't fun now because she realizes how insecure he is. And he tells her to eat the candy that'll hide her scent, and she, like, says his name, and he says, you have to stop. It's so informal. It's too intimate. And she says, more intimate than you watching me masturbate or like coming all over me. And she says, like, why are you so afraid to like admit that you want me? And he's like, I don't. And he says, I thought when you hid your scent it would help me, but it's not just food or sex that you smell like. He says, your scent is like mine. It belongs to me. It's how my father described it when he found his chosen. He says, I thought it was just your scent making me obsess over you, but even now I have this inner dread of losing you, and I'm obsessed with you. He says, I admire you, your mind. I long to be like you. And she says, you want more than just my body? Men don't want more than just my body. He admits, like, he's scared of her, like, leaving him. And he says, my heart chose you when your blood touched me. You are my chosen. And she's like, now she's panicking. Louisa really pisses me off. Because, like, you have wanted this man this whole time. And now he's basically telling you, like, I don't just want to have sex with you. Like, I'm in love with you. You're my fated mate. And she's like, this isn't what I wanted. I just wanted to have sex with you. And I said, I hate her. Note, I hate her. So, whatever. They're like, okay, well, we don't have time for this. So he goes to drink from her. And all she can think about is, like, being with him. But he's drinking a lot, and she starts to feel faint, and he just keeps drinking and won't stop. So she pulls the dagger, and her heart stutters, and she says, you're killing me. You're killing your chosen. You promised to protect me. And she drops. So he pulls out the book and finds a spell, and he feeds her some candy, and, like, it brings her back. And she just says, like, he starts apologizing. He's like, we need to go. She's like, we need to go. So we go to Clara, and basically Phineas made these, like, pools. He made a pool of blood, and a pool of cheese, which the Rat King is, like, rolling around in. I get more disgusted, like, the further I get. And he knows that he cannot break her out just yet, so he's, like, waiting, because he's, like, exhausted all his magic. And, of course, I was like, of course the Rat King, like, this is, like, when he has this giant, like, rat penis. And luckily, he tells Phineas, like, you can have your pick of your concubine, and he's like, oh, yeah, I want her, the human one. And he's like, oh, that's fine, I don't even want her tonight. Like, thank God. So sorry for whoever he wanted. So he, like, Phineas gets her out of the cage. Everybody just starts having sex all over the place. And he's, like, takes her over to, like, the side. And he's, like, trying to make it look like they don't know each other. And he tells her, like, we can't leave yet because I used my magic. And, like, the king is watching them. So he's like, look, we're going to have to actually have sex and, like, make it look like it's what he wants. So he like blows like his breath in her face because she's like, it smells so bad in here. And like, he smells good. So he's like, we can't be affectionate or whatever. So she's like, just do it or whatever. And she tells him that she loves him. And so like, he's like got her like up against a wall and like they have sex and like, he's like done, but he flips her around and like someone comes up and it's like, are you done with that one? He's like, does it look like I'm done with this one? And he's like, just another hour or so. And like, my magic will be back. Like, just bear with me. So we go back to Louisa and she is like trying to remember this jingle she taught herself to remember the spells. Like she made like an acronym or something for the spells. And so they basically like, they need a guard to like distract or like get them in or whatever. So Lear goes and gets one of the guards and they use the mimicry spell so that they can look like the guard. So they go and they're crossing the bridge and she is like panicking the whole time. She's like, okay, we can do this. And she notices like Lear starting to like flash in front of her, like go back. It doesn't last long at all. So he started to like go back. So she pulls out one of the orbs she took from Dresselmeyer and it like makes this mist. So it's like she throws it so that when they cross the bridge where like the other rats are, they can like get through there like concealed. And then they get down like these other steps and they realize they're in like a whole nother rat camp. But they're like, she starts panicking and she's like, just leave me. Like, I can't do this or whatever. But he's like, you're fine. Follow your instincts. So they are able to like sneak across this like rat camp. And she is just like so exhausted. And he apologizes because he knows he took so much blood from her. But they are able to make it across and they make it to this like new land area, which is called the Soul Grave. And it's where like all of their like ancestors rest basically. And he can hear someone coming, and there's actually 4 someones. But when he looks, Lear sees it's like these 4 white reindeer, and he starts running towards them, and he grabs one of them, hugging them, and they're actually the royal guard who protect the unending pool. So they get him up on a horse, and she like wants him so badly. And so she like leans back into him, and she says, I didn't mean to hurt you earlier. I was just overwhelmed with like everything you were saying. She says, I was frightened and that you were asking for too much. And he says, I only asked for as much as I'm willing to give, which is everything. And she says, well, we've barely been acquainted for 2 weeks. And he's like, and I was like, how the hell has it only been 2 weeks? Like, I was like, so much has gone on. But he says, I love you. And she says, you hate me. And he kisses her forehead and she's just like melting. And she's like, what would it be like if I was married to you? And he says, what? And become my queen? And he says we could travel and eat amazing food and have parties. And he tells her she has a wonderful mind for strategy. And that same mind that has been used for seduction could be used otherwise. And she doesn't know why she's holding back because she was literally willing to marry anyone like in the human world. And he goes, like, they get to, like, the camp, and he goes to speak with his people, and, like, she, like, is given to, like, one of the aides, and they're like, here, come bathe, and, like, she feels like she was just, like, dismissed and, like, thrown to the side. So she's instantly jealous all over. And she wonders, like, will he just abandon me here and, like, go finish, like, the task without her and, like, go to the pool without her, and she won't even get to see his curse be broken? And so she like soaks in the bath and she's like chastising herself because she wants to be like the object of all his obsessions, but she also thinks how she like the way she treats him. And then she starts to like remember and like worry about Clara also. She like goes, like she eats and then she goes to like her tent. She's like, great, like this isn't the royal tent, like whatever. But she like lays down and he comes in and she starts snapping at him. She's like, you left me all alone. And he says, you literally said you were tired and you wanted a bath and I gave it to you. He's like, of course you didn't want that, like whatever. And she says like, well, why are you here? He's like, because I wanted to check on you. And she says, well, you checked on me, like go to your little royal tent. He's like, all of the tents look like this, like what are you talking about? And she says, do you want to know what I think? And he's like, not particularly. She says, I think that you propose marriage because you're exhausted and you need someone to pet your ego. And he says, maybe I'm a prince who tried to go to my own tent, but I craved you instead. And he says, maybe you're trying to wound me because you're afraid for what I feel for you, but I'm asking, could you love me? Could you choose me? And she says, I'm afraid that this isn't true. I'm afraid of myself and that one day you'll come to realize that you don't really want me, or I'll get bored and I'll find something else to keep me entertained. And he says that the chosen bond is supposed to be the most satisfying. I don't think you'll seek other entertainment. And he says, you've wanted me, tempted me, here I am. And she says, I love you and I choose you. And he says, say it again. And she does. And he says, I choose you too. And so they do end up having sex. And I'm like, okay, but what the hell about the pool? Like, I'm like, I don't even give a damn about that. You're supposed to be how close to the pool? Why did we not go there?
Right.
Why did we come to this camp? Go to the pool. And of course, because after this, he hears something, and he's like, okay, get dressed. The Seelie are coming. Yeah, I put yes. I freaking bet they are. I bet they are. Because why did we stop for 3 hours? I don't know. Anyways, so they mount on this reindeer and everyone else stays back to defend and they start like heading to the pool. But of course, not only are they on foot, they're coming out of the sky at them. So we go to Clara and she is so sore because they have been having sex for hours. But like, so, like Phineas has basically been like pretending or having sex like off and on for hours. But now like everyone is asleep because she can't tell if like Phineas did it or if they're just like tired. And he like basically glamours her and they start look like a doe and they start leaving. And his power is back, but they get almost out of the tunnels, and like the spider woman Magda that the Rat King had asked about him, she's there and she's blocking the exit, and she says, "I vouched for you, but then I told the king later that we should probably keep you because you're so delicious." And she blows dust into Clara's face and it removes her glamour. And he says, "She's mine, move aside." And Magda says, "Well, you don't have that much power. We allowed you to drain yourself on purpose. You're so stupid." And he says, "Yes, I was drained, but you also allowed me time to recharge because I recharge rather fast." And he literally like shatters the entrance and disintegrates her. So all of the soldiers start coming and he is like taking them all out and he's like, you know, "We're going to fly. We're going to get out of here." And he's like, she's like, "Make me a weapon." And he's like, I can't do anything with metals." And she's like, "Okay, what about a whip?" And he's like, "You're so smart." He makes her a pink whip and she starts like killing off the soldiers too. And they start to get away. But then this noose of shadows comes around Phineas, drags him down. And like she hears his bones snap and his like wings are destroyed and he's like unconscious on the ground. So she is like turns and she sees the Rat King and she just starts like killing off all the soldiers with her whip. And she is so pissed. And like the angrier she gets, like the more powerful she gets until it's only the Rat King left. But then when it's just him, he comes forward and he is able to like take her down and she passes out. So we go to Louisa and it's been like 4 hours and they're still being chased, but they have not like taken them out because I guess they ran out of weapons or whatever. So they finally can see the pool and Lear starts turning back into like the Nutcracker. And it's because the place that they're in, like it's actually reverting him faster. So she like slams into the ground. She like breaks her wrist and she's bleeding because the Seelie like jump out of the sky at her. And Lear has like shrunken all the way back down to a doll and they like grab him, but when he shrinks they like lose hold of him, so she's able to catch him out of the sky and she just throws him in the pool and they all stop attacking and they just watch. And he bursts out of the like water. He's like humongous and he's naked, of course, and he has like these silver wings and there's a scar from where his splinter was, and he has like this really deep voice and he tells her to come here and he's like, "I need to change into my dragon form." And we go back to Clara, and so her and Phineas were caught and they're in this like pitch black dungeon where they cannot see anything. They don't know how many days it's been and they're both naked and Phineas has like an iron collar on and his wings were shredded but they've healed now, and she only knows that because she can touch him, and she knows like her sister and Lear should have made it to the pool by now if they're not dead. She feels like disgusting because like there's like a chamber pot or whatever, but somehow Phineas still smells good. And she asks him like, you know, "Do you think the Rat King forgot about us?" And he's like, "Oh no, you made him respect him enough to put you down here instead of making you a concubine." And she says, "If we get out of here, I'll paint the whole fight scene," because he was unconscious obviously. And for whatever crazy ass reason, they are still having sex. They can't do anything else, can't see, but and she smells disgusting and feels disgusting, but they're still having sex down, you know, whatever, priorities. So a guard comes and tells them they've both been summoned by the king as entertainment. So they're both like shaved and like bathed and then like bound and gagged and manacled. And they're pulled up to like the throne room, and Phineas has like been washed and oiled and has like these ropes all over him. And the king basically says they're going to have like a dinner, and then Phineas is going to be dessert, and they're basically going to rape him a bunch of times. And then he's going to rape Clara in front of him and then kill both of them because that's terrifying. So they start the dinner part, thank God. But then there's like this huge bang and the king is like, "What is that?" And so 2 soldiers go, but then they come back in toy form. And then she hears Dresselmeyer and he is like spelling the whole place. And she jumps for the Rat King's scepter because he drops it, and everyone starts shrinking down into toys. And she gets up and she just takes the scepter and like smashes the Rat King into like a bunch of pieces. And Dresselmeyer says, "It took a long time to track you down, but this place is actually poorly defended." And she sees like the Phineas doll and she's like, "Oh no, you cursed him. He's a good one." And he says, "There are no good ones." And he says, "We need to find your sister and go home." And she tries to explain and she says, "You left us." And he says, "I was unprepared to fight them." But he says, "Now, instead of one at a time, I can actually curse all the Fae as I want." And he says, "I was always coming back for you." And she says, you were a coward, admit it. And he says, 2 girls I barely knew betrayed me, and they are all wicked fae, and your father was a fae hunter with me. He says, my sisters were stolen from me, and your father's parents and brother were drugged and raped by fairies. And she says, but that doesn't mean that you can assume that they're all bad. And Dresselmeyer says, well, I started out just hunting the bad ones. Those are the statues that are in my gallery. And she says, but you like hunting them. And he says, well, I needed the money. And he turns them into things and sells them. And she says, well, why did you take Lear? And he says, vanity. He says, I found him alone in a garden reading, and I spelled him. And then he pulls out a map and he says, that's interesting. And he says, Louisa is coming this way. And he says, we should go because, the prince is going to want revenge on me. And she's like, no. And Dresselmeyer says, this isn't you. You're normally the reasonable one. And Clara says, I'm staying here with him, and I'll free him if you won't lift his curse, talking about Phineas. And Dresselmeyer calls her a hypocrite, saying that, you want me to free your lover, but leave the other ones because they're your enemy. And she gives him the king's scepter. Well, she holds it, and she says, if you free Phineas and you stay to talk to Louisa and Lear, I will give you this. Let me see. Are you freaking kidding me? Pause in the middle of this episode that we weren't recording and finished the whole episode and had to start over. So, there's that. So, anyways, back to my notes again. So, one more time. Oh my gosh. Okay, so Dresselmeyer frees Phineas, and Phineas says, hi, I think you tried to catch me before. And he says, Clara, I'm assuming you made some kind of deal that I can't kill him. And she's like, yeah, haha. So Phineas makes them clothes so that they aren't naked anymore. And they go outside and they see this giant dragon. And Clara's like, what is that? And Phineas says, oh, that's one of the several forms that Lear can take. And Louisa, gets off because she's riding on his back and says, hey, we killed all the other rat armies. They stopped at the ravine and other places first and then came there. And Lear immediately heads towards Dresselmeyer trying to kill him. But they stop him and they have him change back into his human or fae form. And Lear gives him some clothes also. And we switch over to Louisa, and she asks Lear what other forms he can take, and he says, why? Are you thinking about this for sex? And of course she is. And so Clara tells them, she's happy to see that they're finally together, and both girls say, they're both going to stay in Faerie. They're not going back. So Dresselmeyer agrees that he'll release the Fae from the gallery, and he releases all of them except for the, very first ones he caught, because they are just, too old, and they can't be released. And then he also brings their luggage since they're staying, and Lear tells them, well, make sure you say your goodbyes because I'm going to ban him from Faerie. He can never come back. And Clara tells him, he can keep their inheritance, and she turns to Louisa, and she's like, oh my gosh, we're both marrying rich. And Phineas goes, who told you I was rich? And Louisa and, Clara tell Dresselmeyer to take the money and, hire real servants and, do good with his inventions, and he can make anything except for weapons. And he tells them he will shatter the portal, and the next day Lear has his coronation, and he also makes Louisa his queen. And he sends all of the Unseelie and the rat whatever that turned into toys back over to their kingdom, because there are other Unseelie, they just are in their own kingdom minding their business. And I agree with Louisa because she's I hate how forgiving he is, and also I would have just stepped on all those toys, smash. So we go to Clara, and this is kind of an epilogue. So it's been a few weeks, and Lear and Phineas have been traveling around the country killing monsters, and the girls have been going with them. And at this point, Clara's doing a painting of all the things that happened over that time, all the history. And Phineas gives orders that while she is painting, she has to be disturbed every 2 hours to eat and drink, and if it reaches midnight, she must be put to bed. And so Louisa comes to her and sees her doing a painting of when Louisa threw the Nutcracker into the unending pool. And she finally apologizes to Clara and basically admits Clara was right. She did always try to bring down Clara's happiness because she was unhappy. And so Clara also apologizes for being very judgmental of Louisa, which she was. And they both admit they don't miss home and they don't miss their dad. And Louisa tells her that she's not just going to be the queen, she's going to actually be an advisor to Lear and train. And she slips and tells her that her and Phineas, Clara and Phineas, are going to have a sweet shop and also have a place for her to paint and actually be a painter. And basically Phineas and Lear come back from their travels, and they all meet up at the shop, and that is the end. And Keely, what did you rate it?
I rated it 4 stars. I liked it. It was very spicy and had a lot of triggers, but the plot itself was, I think, very fleshed out and fun. But
yeah, I told Keely I rated it a 3.75, which, like, just vibe-wise, I really liked it, but I really did not like Louisa or Lear.
Yeah.
Like, I think that neither one of them really had a character arc, and I think they're both, like, the same people that they were at the beginning of the book. Like, Lear was just, like, he's very black and white. He, like, is very arrogant, and he just, like, there's no, like, gray area with him. I don't even think, like, he learned from his experience, like, being turned into the Nutcracker. And Louisa is, like, kind of just a terrible person. And she just, like, I just think she's a terrible person. I think Clara and even Drosselmeyer even had, like, growth in the book. And, like, I don't think Phineas really needed to. Like, I don't think he was a bad person. Like, I think he seemed like a decent person from the very beginning.
yeah.
I think he, like, had his own, like, abuse and issues that he was working through. So... yeah, so I mean, I enjoyed it for what it was, and I did look it up, and Clara is like, I didn't read I didn't really know the, like, main plot of the Nutcracker, so Clara is the main girl in the Nutcracker, which I did feel like was a plot hole, because I was like, they mentioned it, and I get that that's, like, just a, like, Rebecca mentions it, and it's like a hint at the Nutcracker, but in the way it's dropped, it's like they're going to bring it up again, but that never really does, because Clara doesn't really give, like, main character vibes.
Right.
She gives, like, co-character, and if anything, like, Louisa ends up being the queen, so, like, there's that. So, yeah.
I think Clara and Phineas really carried the book.
Yeah.
Their parts really was what I was
They're much
in.
better. Like, anytime we go back to, like, Louisa and Lear, I'm like, ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, really, the only real scene that I enjoyed with the two of them is when they were, like, trying to get across, like, the bridge or whatever the heck it was.
Oh, when they, like, do the mimicry spell.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But.
Yeah. He, like, yeah. And I'm just like, he hates you. And I'm like, even if he, like, I don't know, like, I don't see that being, like, a warm and fuzzy, like, long-term relationship. Yeah. Like, I just don't see it going very well, like, being a happy relationship for the two of them. But, whatever. So, reviews.
Reviews. Okay. I'm going to go with a different 5-star than what I did originally. Okay. 5 stars. This book was delightful. Human sisters Clara and Louisa get thrust into the world of fairy and on a mission to rescue the Fae Prince from a curse. The vivid imagery and scenery Rebecca conjured up is truly felt like a whimsical holiday fantasy. While there, they met Finn, the wild and gorgeous cousin to the prince. All together, they must battle the armies of the evil Rat King to get to the unending pool to break the prince's curse. When I tell you, I am PB, I was really like, what does she mean? I am PB and jealous of Clara and Louisa for getting to live this magical world. I mean it. Also, Finn might be one of my favorite book characters in general. He was so fun, funny, spicy, and sweet. Literally, if you know, you know. The Rat King was conjured from my actual nightmares.
Nightmare fuel.
How did you see into my brain? The story had delicious spice, heart-thumping action, and perfectly sweet romance. I didn't want it to end. And I agree with her. I agree.
I do agree.
Okay. Now, for the 1-star reviews, and we have a couple that I've earmarked. 1 star. Why on God's green earth do I need to know the size, or quite frankly, absolutely anything about the Rat King's bulge? Felt. When I die, God is going to make me read passages from this book out loud, and I will finally have to reckon with the reading choices I've made. DNF. I'm calling this one. This book can't go 2 paragraphs without mentioning something sexual. Just because a character likes sex doesn't mean it has to be in their entire personality. DNF at 80%. I just couldn't do it. Once I read, my heart was wet for him. It was over.
Gross. And yes, Rat King is nightmare fuel. Like, I literally want somebody to, like, I need somebody to draw it, though. Like, I need to see it and then not see it. Like, ugh. Yes. Okay. So, our next one, which we recorded first before this, so that one will have our Thanksgiving update. I don't know why. I'm so sorry. It literally will be Christmas when you hear about Thanksgiving. That is hilarious. Our next book that will come out like right before Christmas, I believe the 23rd, is You Better Watch Out by James S. Murray and
Darren Wearmouth.
Yes, and it is a Christmas holiday thriller as well. Oh, okay, no, You Better Watch Out comes out December 16th, so that won't be Christmas. But so we'll have to remember for Queen of Shadows to tell you guys Merry Christmas. And happy Hanukkah and Kwanzaa. Okay, so no, disregard everything else I just said, and I'll probably take it out. Anyways, okay, I'm done talking and rambling. So, yeah, so I think that's all we have, and we'll talk to you guys next week. Bye.